Control the frame. What the argument is about. Don't fight on their terms. If they say, "Why are you always late?" reframe it to, "What makes you think I'm always late?" Machiavelli Niccolo. How to win any argument without speaking more. The silent strategy of power. Most people believe arguments are won with words. More logic, more explanation, more force. They're wrong. Arguments are not won by those who speak the most. They are won by those who reveal the least, because every word you give away is information. And information, in the wrong moment, becomes leverage against you. Think carefully. The last time you argued, did you control the conversation? Or did the conversation control you? Because the moment you react, you are no longer deciding. You are responding. And the one who responds is already behind. Power in conversation is not loud. It is not aggressive. It is not desperate to be understood. Power is quiet. Power is quiet, measured, intentional. It does not rush to defend itself. It does not chase agreement. It does not explain beyond necessity, because true control is not about convincing others. It is about controlling what you reveal and what you withhold. Rule 1. Emotional discipline. When challenged, most people react immediately, instinctively. They raise their voice. They defend their position. They try to correct the narrative. And in doing so, they expose themselves, their triggers, their doubts, their need to be understood. A composed individual does something different. They pause, not out of weakness, but by design. That pause creates distance. And in that distance, clarity. Because while others are reacting, they are observing, measuring, choosing, and that choice is where control begins. The danger of explanation. There is a quiet mistake people make.
They believe that if they explain enough, they will be understood. But explanation invites resistance. Every added detail creates a new angle to challenge. Every justification signals uncertainty, and uncertainty weakens position. Those who understand this speak with precision. They say only what is necessary, then they stop. Because authority is not found in volume, it is found in restraint. The observer advantage. Watch closely in any argument. One person is speaking, the other is reacting, but rarely is anyone observing. The observer holds the advantage, because they are not pulled into the emotional current. They remain outside of it, and from that position, they see patterns others miss. Tone, timing, intent. And once you see those patterns, you no longer argue blindly. You move deliberately. The turning point. At some moment in every argument, there is a shift. A point where emotion either escalates or dissolves. Most people miss it because they are too involved, too reactive, too focused on being right. But the disciplined individual recognizes it, and instead of pushing forward, they withdraw pressure. They lower intensity. They redirect the conversation, not forcefully, but subtly. And that subtle shift changes the entire dynamic. Strategic withdrawal. Not every argument is meant to be won, because engagement is a form of investment. And not every situation deserves your energy. The ability to disengage without emotion, without explanation, is not avoidance. It is control. It sends a message without words. I am not available for this, and in many cases, that silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. The final understanding. Winning an argument is not about domination. It is not about proving someone wrong. It is about maintaining your position, your composure, your clarity. Because once you lose control of yourself, you lose control of the interaction. And once that happens, the outcome no longer belongs to you. But understand this, arguments are only the surface, a visible layer of something deeper, because the real game is not about what people say to you. It is about what they believe about you before you even speak. Perception, reputation, position. It is about maintaining your position, your composure, your clarity, because once you lose control of yourself, you lose control of the interaction. And once that happens, the outcome no longer belongs to you. But understand this, arguments are only the surface, a visible layer of something deeper, because the real game is not about what people say to you. It is about what they believe about you before you even speak. Perception, reputation, position.
Now picture this carefully. Not the person who becomes aware, not the one who sharpens their perception, but the one who never pauses long enough to notice anything at all. The one who lives entirely on reaction, impulse, emotion, and habit. He doesn't think he's losing control, because nothing breaks immediately. Nothing collapses in a dramatic way. There's no single moment where everything falls apart. That's what makes it dangerous, because what happens to him happens quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. At first he feels normal, engaged, present, even confident. When people speak to him, he responds quickly, naturally, without hesitation. If he's challenged, he defends. If he's questioned, he explains. If he's misunderstood, he clarifies. It feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like the right thing to do. And in isolation, it is. But patterns don't reveal themselves in isolation. They reveal themselves over time. And over time, something begins to change. Not in him, but in how people respond to him. It starts with tone, subtle shifts, a slight edge in how people speak to him. Less caution, less respect in their delivery. Then timing changes. People interrupt him mid-thought, not aggressively, just enough to signal something has shifted, something unspoken. At first he dismisses it, thinks maybe people are distracted, busy, unfocused, but then it becomes consistent, predictable, and still, he doesn't see it, because he's focused on content, on what's being said, not on the dynamic underneath it. So he adapts the only way he knows how. He increases effort, explains more, speaks longer, clarifies deeper, adds logic, adds reasoning, adds detail, believing, if he just communicates better, everything will stabilize again. But the opposite happens, because effort, when misapplied, doesn't solve problems. It amplifies them. The more he speaks, the more space he creates. And in that space, others begin to move. They question more, challenge more, push further. Not necessarily because they want conflict, but because the structure allows it. And here's the part he doesn't understand. He has trained them, without realizing it. Every reaction he gave taught them what gets a response. Every explanation taught them where to push. Every moment of over-engagement lowered the cost of challenging him. So now, they don't hesitate. They don't hold back, because they know exactly what will happen. He will respond. He will explain. He will engage. Predictably, consistently, reliably. And once a human being becomes predictable, they become readable. And once they become readable, they become influenceable. That's when the real shift begins. Not externally, internally, because now, he starts to feel it. A subtle tension, a growing frustration. Things feel heavier. Interactions feel harder. Conversations feel longer, but less effective. He notices something else too. He speaks more, but people listen less. He explains better, but people question more. He tries harder, but results decline. And this creates confusion, because from his perspective, he is improving. He is doing more, giving more, trying more. So why is everything weakening? The answer is uncomfortable, because it has nothing to do with effort, and everything to do with awareness. He is playing the wrong layer of the game. He thinks communication is about clarity, but in reality, it's about positioning. He thinks more explanation equals more control, but in reality, more explanation often signals less control. And while he's focused on being understood, others are focused on something else entirely. Leverage, position, dynamic. So slowly, without any clear moment marking the transition, he loses ground. Not all at once, but piece by piece, interaction by interaction, until eventually, his presence changes. People don't respond to him the same way anymore. His words carry less weight. His silence carries no meaning, because his silence is rare, unfamiliar, unexpected. So when it happens, it doesn't create power. It creates confusion, and confusion, without authority, is ignored. That's the consequence of long-term exposure. When you've revealed too much, too often, too consistently, there's nothing left to protect. No unpredictability, no mystery, no resistance. And without those elements, there is no control. That's when he begins to realize something is wrong. But by now, the system is already built. People have categorized him, defined him, positioned him, not consciously, but behaviorally. And once that classification is established, it becomes the lens through which everything is interpreted. Everything he says is filtered through it. Everything he does is reduced by it. Everything he attempts to change is resisted by it. Because consistency creates expectation, and expectation resists disruption. So now, to shift perception, to rebuild position, to regain influence, requires something far more difficult than maintaining it ever would have. It requires breaking patterns, not once, but repeatedly, consistently, over time. And even then, progress is slow, because people don't adjust instantly. They observe, they test, they wait to see if the change is real or temporary. And during that period, he feels it, the resistance, the skepticism, the lack of immediate response, which tempts him to fall back into old patterns, to explain again, to justify again, to prove himself again. And that is where most people fail, because they mistake discomfort for failure, when in reality, discomfort is the signal of transition. But without awareness, they retreat, back into predictability, back into reaction, back into exposure. And the cycle repeats. That's the trap. Not obvious, not dramatic, but deeply consistent, and incredibly difficult to escape, once it becomes your default. That's why awareness matters. Not as a concept, but as a skill. The ability to see what's happening beneath the surface, to notice the shift before it solidifies, to recognize patterns before they define you. Because once you can see it, you can interrupt it, you can create space, you can choose differently. But without that awareness, you don't choose, you respond. And when you respond, without control, you reinforce the very system that limits you. So understand this clearly. The real danger is not failure. It's slow erosion, the kind that feels normal while it's happening, the kind that doesn't alert you until it's already established. And by then, you're no longer shaping interactions. You're operating inside them. Most people misunderstand power. They think it lives in volume, in dominance, in having the final word, in forcing the other person into silence. But that's not control. That's performance. Real control is quieter than that, less visible, less emotional, and far more dangerous. Because the person who truly controls an interaction rarely looks like they're trying to control it at all. They don't rush. They don't overreact. They don't fight for every misunderstanding. And most importantly, they do not lose themselves inside the emotion of the moment. That's where most people fail. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack communication skills, but because they lose internal control before the conversation is even over. And the moment that happens, everything changes. Because once emotion takes over, precision disappears, awareness narrows, judgment weakens. And now, you are no longer directing the interaction. You are surviving it. Think about how arguments usually unfold. At first there's tension, small, manageable. Then someone says something unexpected, something sharp, something personal. And immediately, the emotional system activates. Heart rate rises. Attention narrows. Your mind begins searching for defense, not understanding. Defense. That's the shift. And most people never notice it happening, because it feels natural, automatic, normal. But automatic reactions create predictable outcomes. You speak faster. You interrupt more. You stop listening. You begin arguing against emotion instead of information. And once that happens, the interaction stops being strategic. It becomes chemical, instinctive, reactive. That is why so many people walk away from arguments feeling drained. Not because the conversation was difficult, but because they surrendered control of their internal state. And without internal control, external control is impossible. That's the part nobody teaches. People teach persuasion, debate tactics, communication techniques, but very few teach emotional positioning, the ability to remain centered while pressure is applied, the ability to observe without immediately reacting, the ability to stay calm, even when someone wants access to your emotions. Because make no mistake, many arguments are not searches for truth. They are searches for leverage. The other person may not even realize they're doing it consciously. But human beings constantly test emotional openings, tone, expression, reaction speed, defensiveness. All of it communicates information, and information creates advantage. That's why composure matters. Not for appearance, not to look strong, but because composure protects clarity, and clarity protects position. Now understand something important. Silence is often misunderstood. People think silence means weakness, avoidance, fear. But strategic silence is none of those things. Strategic silence is restraint. It is the refusal to give unnecessary access to your internal state. Because every unnecessary explanation creates exposure. Every emotional reaction creates visibility. And visibility, without control, creates vulnerability. That's why the most composed individuals speak carefully. Not because they are hiding, but because they understand the value of limitation. They understand that once words leave your mouth, you no longer control how they are interpreted. And interpretation is where perception begins. This is the deeper layer most people never see. Arguments are rarely decided only by facts. They are decided by perception, by emotional positioning, by who appears stable, and who appears reactive. Because human beings do not only evaluate information logically, they evaluate energy, certainty, control, presence. That's why two people can say the exact same thing and receive completely different reactions. One appears grounded, the other appears defensive. One appears composed, the other appears desperate to be understood. And desperation, even subtle desperation, changes the entire dynamic. This is where reputation begins to matter. Not reputation in the social media sense, but psychological reputation. The identity people assign to you over time. Because before most conversations even begin, people already carry assumptions about who you are. Whether you are emotionally stable, whether you are reactive, whether you are easily pressured, whether you seek approval. And those assumptions influence everything. The same sentence spoken by two different people will be interpreted differently, based entirely on perceived position. That is why influence begins long before words are exchanged. It begins with emotional memory, patterns, history, presence. Now imagine two individuals. One reacts to everything, defends constantly, explains excessively, needs to clarify every misunderstanding, needs to prove every point. Over time, people begin to expect that behavior, predict it, use it. They know exactly how to pull him into emotional engagement, exactly how to provoke a response, exactly how to make him explain himself again. And because he always responds, his reactions lose weight. His emotions become accessible, readable, controllable. Now imagine the opposite. Someone who does not rush to defend. Someone who does not panic when misunderstood. Someone who does not chase agreement from every room they enter. Their silence creates uncertainty. Their restraint creates distance. And distance changes perception. Because when people cannot easily read you, they become more careful around you, more observant, more measured. That is psychological positioning. Not aggression, not intimidation, control. And here's the paradox. The less desperately you try to control perception, the more stable your perception becomes. Because stability signals certainty, and certainty changes how people respond to you. Now this does not mean becoming cold, detached, emotionless. That's another misunderstanding. Emotional control is not emotional absence. It is emotional discipline, the ability to experience emotion without becoming governed by it. That distinction matters. Because anyone can remain calm when nothing is happening. The real test happens under pressure, during conflict, misunderstanding, disrespect, provocation. That is where awareness separates itself from instinct. And awareness is always slower than reaction. That's why pause matters. A pause interrupts automatic behavior. It creates space between stimulus and response. And inside that space, choice returns. Most people never enter that space. They move directly from feeling to reaction, which means they are not choosing. They are executing patterns. And repeated patterns become identity. That's why some people remain trapped in the same dynamics for years. Not because the world refuses to change, but because their reactions never do. The same defensiveness, the same over-explaining, the same emotional leakage. Again, and again, and again. Until people around them stop seeing possibility and start seeing predictability. That is the real danger. Not losing one argument, but becoming psychologically readable. Because once people fully understand your emotional patterns, they no longer need to overpower you. They simply position around you. And positioning is often more powerful than force. This is why highly disciplined individuals conserve emotional energy carefully. They do not respond to every challenge. They do not defend themselves to every critic. They do not attempt to control every perception, because they understand something deeper. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every opinion deserves engagement. Not every conflict deserves participation. That realization changes everything. Because once you stop fighting for control in every interaction, you begin protecting control where it actually matters, internally. And internal stability changes external presence. People feel it, even when they cannot explain it logically. A grounded person changes the emotional atmosphere of a room, not through force, but through steadiness, through lack of desperation, through the absence of emotional chaos. That absence becomes influence, and influence is far more powerful than temporary victory. Now understand this carefully. The real game is not arguments. Arguments are only symptoms, visible expressions of deeper dynamics. The real game is perception, identity, positioning, the invisible structure that determines how your words are received before you even speak. Because once a perception solidifies, everything becomes filtered through it. Confidence becomes arrogance. Silence becomes weakness. Emotion becomes instability, or the opposite. And those interpretations shape reality more than facts alone ever will. That's why awareness can never stop at behavior. It must move deeper, into perception management, into emotional discipline, into understanding how social dynamics actually operate beneath the surface. Because if you only learn how to react better, but never learn how perception is formed, you remain vulnerable, more aware than before, but still exposed. And that is the next layer most people never reach. The hidden architecture behind influence itself. How reputations are built. How authority is reinforced. How subtle emotional signals shape the way people interpret your presence. Because by the time someone speaks to you, their mind has often already decided who they believe you are. And if you don't understand that, you may spend years trying to change outcomes, without ever changing the frame producing them. So don't stop here. Because mastery is not a single realization. It is layered awareness. And the moment you believe you fully understand human behavior is usually the exact moment your blind spots become dangerous again.